About a week ago, KTVB decided to make known a change to our mugshot policy, saying we'll no longer use them in certain crime stories. Mugshots, those pictures taken of a person accused of a crime when they are being booked into a jail, they're part of public record and would usually accompany crime stories. We'd include that photo of the suspect while explaining why they were arrested, and it would be on air and online. Like a lot of other news organizations, we're changing that. Why? Well, there's been a conversation among those in the industry, within our parent company and within our own KTVB newsroom about whether posting people's arrest pictures is necessary. After all, they're already readily available on most county jail websites. The conversation centered on whether it does more harm than good in certain situations, focusing on what could be that person's lowest point and likely doesn't reflect who they are as a whole. So we decided we would use a mugshot if there is an immediate threat to public safety, to tell the story of a closed case or explain a prior conviction, in a case involving a public figure or an elected official, and in a case KTVB will follow from start to finish instead of just showing you a picture of someone's arrest and then not finding out the outcome of the criminal process. After all, they could be found not guilty. And this sparked a lot of you to comment by way of text message over the last several days. For example, there were some questioning our religious affiliation and calling our policy too soft-hearted for the criminals, since after all, they chose to do the crime. Sure, don't want to offend the robbers, the muggers, the rapists, and the murderers, right? It's unacceptable, you said. Therefore, they are now offended by our policy and they will choose not to watch our station. Then, of course, there's the accusations of virtue signaling that we made this decision to show or to avoid showing persons of color as criminals. That's why we decided to do this. Well, do you know the percentage of people arrested and booked into the Ada County Jail over the last 3 years? What percentage of them are white? 85%. So this isn't that. And of course, others were supportive, like foster parents who don't want the kids they care for to find their parents at their worst moments. Others called it a great show of respect and humanity and thanked us for doing so. Well, one of those who reached out was State Representative Brooke Green of Boise. She was in favor of our new mugshot policy for a very personal reason. In the summer of 2019, Jessica Harrison was arrested and charged with 2 misdemeanors. Not usually a big deal, at least not usually newsworthy, except Jessica, at the time, was the executive director of the Association of Idaho Cities, which is kind of a big deal in government circles. So it made the news, mugshot and all. KTVB chose to not cover this story back then, but according to Representative Green, her friend was in the middle of a mental crisis at the time, and making the news made things worse.
When you lose somebody to suicide or they take their life, you can't, there's no explanation.
Representative Brooke Green says she first met Jessica Harrison in college, and instantly they became best friends. A friendship that ended nearly 2 years ago.
2 years this November, and it doesn't ever get easy.
What was easy, she says, was noticing when Jessica needed help.
It was June of 2019 that I first recognized that Jessica was sick. As the days went by, it was clear that she was very manic and that she was having a mental break.
Representative Green says Jessica began acting out in public, failing to show up for weekend getaways.
And there were reports of her running up and down the street at night naked. I walked in at one point and she was sitting in the living room and she was just vacuuming one spot for like 10 minutes. We tried everything from getting her committed into hospital, and she fought that because she'd have moments of lucidity, and then she'd slip out, and it was constantly trying to address it. Amongst all the friends, we said the only thing that's going to get her help is if she gets arrested. And sure enough, she gets arrested up in Idaho City. And they arrested her and brought her to the jail, booked her into Ada County Sheriff's, put her on a hold, and then transferred her to the hospital. Well, in that period of time, her mugshot is taken and it is released. I remember seeing the mugshot that day, and it was kind of 2 parts, right? Finally, relief that we know she's somewhere safe and that she can get help, but also understanding at that point that her career is over. And we all knew it. And I remember looking at that going, she's not going to recover from this. And I knew at that point, recovering from having her mugshot present and plastered in 6 media channels and having her career associated with it, that was going to be probably one of the most impactful moments in her life. At that point, she came out of the hospital about a week later. And then she lost her job about a month later. And then that November, she took her life. And we all knew we knew that the outcome when her mugshot hit, that was a potential.
I mean, that mugshot, knowing that everybody sees you at your low point.
Yeah. It's taking somebody's worst moment likely in their life and making it somebody else's entertainment. And, we've now taken their mugshot, plastered it on there and said, we're going to stigmatize whatever occurred, oftentimes in some cases, a mental health issue. And we've really just plastered that on their forehead.
It was during that upcoming legislative session, Representative Green considered drafting a bill that would limit the release of mugshots. So she sought the counsel of some of Idaho's media members. But reminded mugshots are part of the public record, Representative Green let it go. But not completely.
And it's not.
She still thinks, for those arrested and in the middle of a mental crisis, maybe delay the release of their booking photos.
We should afford them the opportunity to seek treatment without stigmatizing their illness and plastering it all over the news. And then in the conclusion of their program, then they can evaluate the release of the mugshot.
So a simple delay, you think,
Yep.
in that is going to be enough to do that?
I would like to see a delay of the release to allow and afford a person who is arrested, who faces these charges, who actually go through the process, a delay for them to go get their assistance. In Jessica's case, if she had been afforded the opportunity to privately go through her illness and afforded the opportunity to seek clinical help, maybe she would be with us today. I don't know. But what I do know is that we use the criminal system too much for people to access help. And so once they actually get access to that help, we really should not stigmatize them because of it. Had she had the privacy to get the help she needed, maybe our outcome would have been different and I'd still have my best friends.
Representative Green says this delay would help those arrested and put on a mental hold, especially if they go through the criminal process and the charges end up being dropped because it's clearly the result of a mental illness. By then, she says, the mugshot should never be made part of the public record. She says that's exactly what happened in Jessica's case. Her charges were eventually dropped. Ada County Sheriff's Office already doesn't take pictures of those on a mental hold. As for the policy of using mugshots of public figures, Representative Green is worried that judgment call that news agencies make is too arbitrary. What constitutes a public figure, she asked. A one-time Teacher of the Year? Representative Green says she would rather find a solution to this issue by working with media instead of going through the State House. And just a reminder, if you or someone you know are going through a tough time, a mental crisis right now, and are considering thoughts of suicide, please do not hesitate to call the number on your screen for the suicide hotline.